Hello, lovely listeners, and welcome to another episode. Today, I am exploring people and culture with Alys Martin. Hi, Alice.
Hello.
So good to have you here. Do you want to just briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I am Alys Martin. I'm the head of people at What Three Words. For people who do not know what we do, we are a geocoding company. Our aim is to revolutionize addressing. So places in the world where addressing isn't very prevalent or very in depth, possibly. We provide a solution to that. We have divided the world into 3 meter squares, and each square has a unique 3 word address. So we are safer, more efficient, easier to find, great in a medical emergency, great with your packages, great with your Deliveroo. So, yeah, that's what we do.
Did you say Deliveroo or delivery?
Deliveries, but Deliveroo would be perfect. Doesn't say if you're after a pizza and they can't find your front door, we are the people to be using. So
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming on
that's
and
all
sharing
right.
your wisdom. As you guys know already, I've spoken about this on the podcast. The format is Alice and I have already had a chat and come up with a theme that we want to talk about that we think is really powerful around people and culture. And the topic that we concluded or very clearly was signaled to
Honed in on.
zoomed in very fast was around the importance of trust. And I think a lot of people listening will agree with us in theory on the value of trust. But I think what was curious about what we spoke about is we can get something in theory, but how are we actually implementing it in practice? So what do you see as some of the gaps there?
I think, it's so funny because people like in organizations, when there is a lack of trust, it really shows up, and it's bonkers because you hire these people to deal with your clients, deal with your customers, deal with your numbers, deal with your cash. And if you don't trust them, to do their jobs in the first place, I mean, it's just, it doesn't set up for the best environment. And I think allowing people the trust and freedom enables them to do much, much better work. Aside from anything else, it's such a sort of gigantic time sink on you if you're not trusting your people, just to be sort of consciously going, what are they up to? Are they working hard enough? What, are they doing the right thing? And it's a really toxic characteristic to start with. Anyway, I don't understand I don't understand why people don't trust their people inherently. You have hired them to work for you. You really should trust them to start with. So
Yes. What do you think so you spoke about the time cost, which obviously I'm very interested in. Um, but what do you think it really costs organizations when they don't create trust and they don't lead with trust?
I think there's a couple of things. There's a sort of the practical thing. So let's talk about the time thing. So I worked somewhere previously, and they were so hot on punctuality. It was start at 9, finish at 5. And I remember it was about my third day, and the CEO messaged me to go, "Did you see that guy? He's turned up 2 minutes late."
Hmm.
I'm like, "You're the CEO. How, like, the cost of your time policing people coming, who the tube might have been late, or, someone tripped over in this, any of these things. There are so many reasons, and it's 2 minutes. Don't be bonkers." And I think the fact that there was no trust there to go, do you know what, you're a grown up, you're coming in to do your job, of course you're going to come into work because that's the right thing to do. Just I think the mental pressure of that, the ludicrous time sink of policing it all, is not great, and it inherently will come out as well. People will know they are being checked up on. People will know that, actually, hang on, oh, you were back half an hour late from lunch. Yes, but I stay half an hour later. But it starts seeping into the culture, and then the culture becomes very sort of mistrusting. And I think at that point, that's when people start, withdrawing discretionary effort as well. People are not going to work hard for someone who is policing them all the time. People are grown-ups. I think you should really, really treat people like grown-ups in the first place.
Yes, I love what you mentioned there about the discretionary effort.
Mm.
Because I think when it does come to hiring, building teams, growing business, and like you said, the work that you're doing at your organization now, you're trying to revolutionize things. I think a lot of people listening work at organizations where they're trying to revolutionize or create change, affect change. And that does require that
Yeah,
discretionary effort. And
yeah.
what you're saying is that's kind of the tax of creating a non-trusting environment.
Huge. Do you know what? I love that as a sort of as a way of phrasing it. It totally is. And I think a lot of organizations rely hugely on discretionary effort, but it'll only ever be there if you've got that culture that kind of encourages it, because otherwise it's something that is freely given, but it can be very freely taken away.
Yeah.
And I think if you're relying on it, then you're going to make life so difficult by sort of cutting that avenue off for yourself. You're totally right. It's a tax on good. It ultimately is a tax on goodwill, really, by not being trusting in the first place.
Yes, I love that. And so we've spoken about the cost of not having trust. How do you think, for anyone listening that's like, okay, I can see we have this trust problem, and this is something we want to improve on, what steps or measures could they take? What have you seen done? What have you tried yourself to kind of foster a culture of trust, an environment of trust? And if there's anything that any experience that you have in going in with like a less trusting environment and building trust,
Yeah.
that would be really interesting.
I think firstly is, I think it's worth just kind of examining why it exists in the first place. Because I think it's easier to tackle if you know what you're trying to sort of what you're actually trying to tackle. So if it is, for example, hang on, we don't think people are working hard enough. Right. And I think that happens particularly as well when people work in a hybrid way. I think there are sometimes that slight like, hang on a minute, are they really walking the dog? Or are they, are they work when obviously they should be at a keyboard at all hours, and which is madness. And I think, right, if you can go, okay, well, what makes you think that? What makes you, what are you worried about happening? And has it happened? Is it where you say, oh, hang on, I'm worried people aren't productive enough. Okay, is that the case? No. Right. Okay. So that's not a reality. That's just something in your mind. So let's tackle what's actually a reality to start with, and figure out, am I worried about nothing, or am I worried about like a fiction, or let's work that bit out first.
Love
I
that.
think in terms of sort of, I've been places where they aren't trusting to start with, and I think it is just, I think sometimes with leaders as well, it's like, particularly I've worked in startups where it's founder led, and it's this is your baby, and you want everyone to be working hard all the time, and I think there is a bit of a fear of what more could we be doing and all this kind of thing. But I think in those kind of environments, my suggestion is always start really small, and be conscious that if you don't trust one person, that's one person. You don't treat 150 people because one person can't be trusted. So that's not kind, that's not fair. But start small with interventions. So the workplace I mentioned where we had a lot of clock watching, we suggested just having some more flexibility at the beginning and end of the day. And we said, look, we'll trial it for 3 months. And we were really, really clear with everyone that if we didn't feel the benefit, we'd stop doing it. And it worked. People were so thrilled that they just had a bit more freedom. They weren't stressing out on the bus to work going, oh God, I'm going to be 5 minutes late and everyone's going to notice, because people noticed that. It didn't matter. And it was so successful. It was so successful. So our 3-month trial ended after about 3 weeks, because it was just glaringly successful. And it just, there were people who came in early, which I think, the CEO liked to see people coming in early. There were people who stayed later. And it was just like, actually, this has relaxed the environment so much more.
Yeah.
And because the environment became more relaxed, people were more open, people became more trusting as a result. So start small with initiatives, trial them, and be very open that, actually, if it's not working, we'll have to think of something else.
Mhm.
And then see where you get to, and then you iterate on it. Actually, do you know what? Like we need maybe a bit more flexibility at the beginning and end of the day, or not quite so much. And you can work with it and work with people. Just be open and honest, and see what works and build on it.
I love the multiple points that you made there, but the ones that really stand out to me were the first one where you said get to the root cause of why the trust isn't there.
Yeah.
It's not blanket. And when you highlighted like perhaps there is like one hire that isn't working out, but if you
Yeah.
make I heard this once, but if you make decisions for like your worst employees, you'll keep attracting the worst employees.
Yeah, it's so true, and it's so unfair as well. You're treating people like children, and I think there's always one person who might take the mick a bit, and that happens. But you deal with one. There was an expression I heard once, which is, it's like you don't. The whole organization doesn't take medicine for the one person that's got a cold. Like look at your face. Oh, okay,
Ah,
you can have that one for
yeah.
later. Yeah, honest, but it's not fair. It holds other people back. It
Yeah.
holds other people back, and as a result, they don't get they don't get the benefit of additional trust. They don't get the benefit of freedom and flexibility and autonomy
Yeah.
if you're holding everyone back because you can't trust the one person. And by all means, very, very much deal with the one person, because everyone else needs to know, hang on, we're not going to get punished for someone else's mistakes.
Yes. And I think on the flip side, if you think about creating a culture of trust, what happens when we make decisions for the best people?
Yeah, exactly that. Exactly. And it's so aspirational at that point as well. And I think the more freedom and autonomy you can give people, the more you get out of them. So
Mhm.
I think it's quite hard. I think, and particularly I think if you're the kind of person who sort of works in very specific ways, sometimes that can be quite it can make you nervous if people do things in different ways. But like, concentrate on the end goal, concentrate on what are you trying to achieve out of this, and then get out of the way so people can do it. Um,
Yes.
and then hopefully you'll get what you need out of it. So
I love that. And then the other thing that you mentioned that I love is all about experimentation. And I think the other important point that you made there was about communication through experimentation and not almost committing to like, we're going to make this abrupt change, everybody turn everything around. And I
yeah,
think we've seen this happen a lot with actually hybrid work,
yeah,
like changing how we work, and we're going to like go fully flexible and then we're not, and we're going to go back and forward versus what you shared about your experience, which is like, we're going to mark this very clear period of experimentation of this one small step that we're taking. This is how we're going to measure success of it, and then communicating that,
yeah.
allowing people. And I think for people listening, I love that you shared that some people will choose to come in earlier, and that will make the CEO very happy.
It does. I think it was fun. We worked in an environment where we were doing a lot of work with the states at the time. And so people were staying until, so this is back to the discretionary effort thing. People were staying until sort of 8 o'clock at night to do those calls with the states. But they were still coming in at 9 because everyone felt like you have to come in at 9. That's the official rule. And for those people, it's like, hang on a minute, I'm doing an extra like however many hours. That's not fair. So I think for them, they felt like, oh, actually, no, this has become fairer. I can turn up a little bit later. I'm very happy to do that discretionary effort and stay later, and have those calls at a time that suits the US clients. And it just made it sort of a nicer working environment as a result.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting. I even have my own example from corporate where everyone in the office got an email one day that we have to come in at 8 a.m., no exceptions. And that was just the change that was made. And we'd all had to sign something when we started saying, we forfeited our right to just a 40-hour work week.
Yeah.
And everyone just accepted it across the board, except my boss, my manager, who was a mum of 3. And she replied and said,
Yeah.
the time that I get with my kids is the morning before school. So my team won't be coming in until 9 o'clock. Thank you. And she was of the seniority where she could. And then my team, I remember being a junior and coming in later than all other seniors because that was the rule within my team.
Oh my God, the eyes must have been upon you.
Yeah, but it was such a powerful lesson for me to stand fair in not just the hours that we're working, but the value we're producing in those hours. And she said to me, like, when I come in, I work, I get things done, we produce results.
Yeah.
And so maybe everyone's adding an extra hour to their day, but they also spending an hour, procrastinating or like on the Daily Mail or whatever it might be.
Exactly right. I'm a massive believer in flexible working anyway, and I do not believe in the office at a desk equals working anyway. The amount of people who will be, actually, I'm doing my online shop, or I'm on the Daily Mail website, or I'm off any of these things. Like, this is not how you measure success. This
Yes.
really, like, bums on seats is not a measure of success. And yeah, you're right. Just, I think, but back to your boss and that example, I can't do this. Here is a clear reason why. I've communicated that. And I think with that kind of thing, it's like, look, here is clear reasons, genuine rationale, and yet all the work is still being done. So,
Yes.
that's it. Just having that kind of open, transparent communication, I think is super, super helpful.
Yes. And I think it's exactly like you said, communicate the why,
Yeah.
communicate the promise as well. Like the
Yeah.
work is still getting done. And like almost invite the opportunity to review performance. Like
Yeah.
this is what
Exactly.
we'll be
Yeah.
doing. And
Exactly.
kind of like that experimentation period that you spoke about also
Yeah.
applies.
I think sometimes for business leaders, like the blanket rule comes out, and there are always exceptions because people are exceptional. No one is that, like, can just that easily fit a mold. And I kind of lost track of where I was going with that, to be honest.
I think it's a good
I
point
think,
anyway. People are exceptional. Love
all
that.
right, but that's the thing. I think, like, say business leaders go, right, do you know what? We need everyone in at 8, and that's fine. But there will be people who will be like, actually, do you know what? I have children, I can't do that. I have a disability, which means it makes it so much harder for me to get on public transport at that time of day. And I think this is the problem with going, actually, everything must be exactly the same for everybody, because people are not the same all the time. And I think if you can, this is when the environment of trust is so important, because it makes having those conversations so much easier to go, look, I can't do this for this reason. Here's what I can do. And I think if you can open up those conversations to talk about what you can do, you can only do it in those positions, in those sort of spaces of safety and trust. And if you haven't cultivated those for your organization to start with, it makes getting anything out of people later down the line so much harder, because
Yeah.
you don't have that space of safety.
Yes. And what you're going to create is kind of that mistrusted environment where people are then speaking and complaining about the shift in policies, even if they're doing it. And then what does that create? What's
Yeah,
that taking
exactly.
away from,
Yeah.
you
And,
know?
and then you go, do you know what? We've spent so much time now dealing with the noise around this. What a massive distraction. And it
Yeah.
didn't and it
Let
didn't need
out.
and it didn't need to be like that.
Yeah.
So yeah. I think, yeah, it's hard. I think, sometimes, and I think as an organization, you might start at one place, but that's why I think it's important to be flexible, because you might end somewhere else. And as long as everything is getting done, does that, does it matter?
Yeah. And so what would you say to anyone who is an employee that almost wants to build trust in an organization when they enter? Like, what can we do when we join organizations, when we join teams, and we're looking to build trust? So we're receiving, hopefully, some kind of, entering a trust-based culture, or so, there's some parameters, but how can we build trust and show trust on our side too?
I think openness and honesty is so important, and it doesn't need to be about everything. I'm big in sort of authenticity and, be who you need to be. But I think understanding the framework within which you're operating in. So as a new employee, you can sit down with a manager and go, like, what is it that's important to you? What do you need from me? This is what I need from you. This is what's important to me. And just so that everyone can be really clear about what matters, what's important. And I think then you know what sort of framework you're operating in. And then if everyone then adheres to the same, to what you've kind of agreed between each other, the trust will build naturally anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do an exercise with my teams, and we and it's such a naff title, but it's like called Manual of Me.
Yes.
But it's all things like, this is the way I like to work. This is what matters to me. It doesn't matter to me if you are late. It matters to me that you do the job you say you're going to do. And if you're not going to do it, I expect the honesty of that. So I'm really clear about, these are my parameters, these are my boundaries. What are yours? And I will try my best to work with those at the same time.
That's so great, because as we started speaking about what can employees do to build trust, I thought like, oh, I actually think the question is what can managers do within teams? And
Yeah.
so you just shared such a powerful example, like a communication strategy and a framework that people can use to start thinking about, like, this is the culture of this team also within an organization. This is what we value as a team. Because I always say to people, like, it's a different brain and a different personality that often is drawn to, like, the data side of a business versus the sales side of the business versus the people side of the business. And it's almost like it's not a one size fits all, what you mentioned before about people being exceptional.
Yeah.
So where does it fall into, like, how does the responsibility fall, do you think, in terms of like the organizational approach to trust, the team and manager led approach to trust, and the individual approach to trust?
I think it has, your organization, it has to start with your organization being trusting to start with. I
Yeah.
mean, because that will affect the development of your people, that will affect the way you recruit into those, into these roles and things like that. And I think then managers need to lead by example. And the more open those spaces become, the easier it is for employees
Yeah.
to feel secure in them. But it has to come from, this is the culture that we want to have.
Yes. I think that's such an important point, and I loved your answer for anyone listening. when you go somewhere, when you're interviewing. I remember when I was interviewing for jobs when I was in the corporate world, and people always said to me, "You're interviewing them as much as they're
Yeah,
interviewing you." I,
massively so.
you know it in theory, but you go in and you're like, it's like going into an interview, it's like going to a first date, and you
Yeah.
forget that like you are there to gather information as well.
I think from from my perspective, I can always think about things that I liked and didn't like about certain jobs. And I
Mm.
think you take those into interviews and you go, hang on a minute, I hated that my last boss, I don't know, was incredibly inflexible. So I always ask an organizer, I always ask, what's your attitude towards flexibility? But importantly, how does that manifest itself? Because I also think in interviews, there's a lot around talk and people can say whatever they like, but it's what actually happens. What is the reality of this? What does that look like? If I walk the dog at 11 o'clock in the morning, is that okay or is that not okay? And because then at least I know what I'm getting into, and if I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And if I'm not, I'm not. And yeah, you've got a choice. So yeah,
Yeah.
you are definitely interviewing companies as much as they're interviewing you.
I love what you shared then as well around like taking the lessons from your previous work environment and turning them into questions in the interview process. But what are your thoughts on though, like probably maybe the first thing I do when I sit in and go down, when I sit in and go down, when I sit in and speak up in an interview, like where do I want to place this so that I'm not, you know, so that it feels approachable and conversational, and we've already established almost the fact that like this could be a good fit from. I feel like part of my thing is like for me to go into an organization and say like these are my standards when they've not even said you match, we would love to hire you.
But I think consider it like this. They say they do, you've got an hour's interview and they do half an hour worth of asking you some questions and things. And then you go, right, kind of it's my turn now. And
Yes.
I think there's like it's about framing, what you need out of it. So, all the practical stuff might exist, but it's what matters to you, what is important. So I like a culture which is quite flexible and friendly and where people, get on well and have a laugh and all that kind of thing. So I would ask about, right, what does your culture look like? Are you the kind, do people do things socially together? I think it doesn't even matter necessarily whether they do or don't. It's just more, I kind of need to know what that looks like.
Mhm.
Are you weirded out by my also, are you weirded out by my question? Because I think that tells me stuff as well. Um, I also think, like I like an interview that's quite chatty and organic because I think you'll get far more out of me like that. And I think if they were incredibly rigid, perhaps I would think, I'm not sure this is the right environment for me.
Yes, yeah.
Um, and it matters. It really matters. It really matters because I think you do your best work in environments where you feel comfortable.
Yes.
Um, and I know places where I wouldn't fit whatsoever, and I think, God, I'd be terrible working there. And other places, I think this suits me because I know I will be able to get more out of people this way. So
Yes.
yeah,
I love what you shared there around like the social, the conversational, because there's the values that matter to us, and then there's the universal ones. Like
yeah,
trust feels universal.
yeah,
Having an environment of trust feels universal, but then maybe some people prefer more regimented routines and some people prefer more
yeah,
flexibility. So I love that
yeah.
differentiation.
And it's that goes back to the whole, people are exceptional. You need to work out what you need for you. And then you should be able to trust in that interview that you can ask about your own needs, because I think equally, if they shut down those questions about your own needs at the interview stage, it doesn't suggest that that environment would be trusting enough for you to acknowledge those needs later on.
Absolutely. I think that's like a really valuable thing for hiring managers to think about, for founders to think about is if you value a culture of trust and maybe you're not doing it perfectly right now because life and
Yeah,
learning, um, how can you build in trust into the interview process so that you are attracting the people that you want to be attracting?
yeah, absolutely. A friend of mine, she works in an incredibly rigid way. But she's really, really explicit about it. She knows herself so well. And she's like, right, I block my calendar out like this. If you need to talk to me about anything, please book in a meeting rather than trying to drop it. Right. But she's really explicit about it. And she says, she brings it up in interviews, and she said, look, you know, if I, for example, put a block in my diary, would people respect that or not? What would be the expectation? And they said, and she goes, that's how I know whether that's going to suit me or not. Yeah.
I love how that example, so like her and you work quite differently, and the issue isn't how you work, it's the trust.
Yeah. Yeah,
And as long as you
absolutely.
trust, then you support how and respect always how
Yeah.
people best work.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does, the trust flows into the respect, you know, it matters massively.
Yeah. I even would love for us, just as we close up, to even, I would love to hear from you, even like your definition of trust, like what that means when you are in a people role, where you are thinking about others. What do we even mean by trust?
I think for me, and you put me on the spot, Vicky, this is my face going, God, I'm gonna have to think of something like really like meaningful, and
It
it was
doesn't have to be
quite sort of
meaningful, just honest.
disaster. I think for me, trust is safety.
Mm.
It is really safety. And I think it's being clear about expectations and knowing that they will be met. And I think the gap in the middle is where the trust sits.
Mm.
And I think that space needs to be held safe, so that you can go from so you can go from one side to the other. Yeah, that's what I think.
Thank you. I did want to end with a bit of a banger.
Thanks. I was going to say, I was quite pleased with that one on the spur of the moment. But yeah, trust. I think trust equals safety.
Amazing. I think that's really important. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Alys, for
Thank
your
you.
expertise, your experience, some very relevant and important stories, considerations, and questions for everyone listening. There's going to be links in the show notes if you want to find out more about Alys and her work. There's going to be links in the show notes if you want to find out more about me and my work. And also, if you want to nominate someone to come on the podcast, you'll be able to do that there too. And of course, by the way, I've not said this on any others, but if you are enjoying this podcast and listening to it, please review it. It helps us get more reach. Share it with a friend or whatever. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. And trust, I think, is one of the big topics, foundational topics that all organizations need to be thinking about. So thank you, Alys.